Good afternoon, those of you tuning in from Europe. Good evening, those of you from Asia, and good morning to those from the Americas. Welcome to this webinar that INSEAD Digital is putting on with sponsorship of Accenture. Topic for today is unlocking the power of AI, building a global permission-based e-commerce ecosystem at CXsphere. And in a little bit, I'm going to introduce our guest today, Mr. Sudipta Sarkar. My name is Amitabh Chattopadhyay. I'm the GlaxoSmithKline Chair Professor of Corporate Innovation at INSEAD. And I worked with CXsphere to develop the case, and we have the pleasure of trying to delve a little bit deeper into that case here today. Now, a few words about the webinar etiquette. All of you are muted, your videos are off, and the chat box is disabled. So the way to ask questions will be to put them in the Q&A tab, okay? And then you have the opportunity to vote questions that are important to you up so that we can see that and then respond to the most relevant questions. The webinar is being recorded. In a few weeks, it'll be posted on INSEAD's YouTube channel. So if you want to let your friends know who might have missed the event, they can look at it over there. If you have technical issues, please get in touch with digital@insead.edu. All right. With that, let me give you a quick overview of the remainder of this hour. First of all, I'd like to take about maybe 10 minutes to give you a brief history and thumbnail sketch of CXsphere, and then introduce our guest, Sudipta Sarkar, who's the CEO and co-founder of the company. And then I'm going to kick off the discussion with a few questions for Sudipta that I'd like to ask, and then start taking questions from the audience to ask him as well. And we'll have 15 minutes for the latter part. Okay. So CXsphere, interestingly, started with a conversation back in 2018 in Kuala Lumpur among a bunch of techie friends, one of whom was Sudipta. And it focused on what are the challenges of e-commerce as they existed at that time in 2018. And the discussion identified 5 key issues. And some of those issues remain very germane and alive today. So as individuals, our information is used by brands. And these brands pay big tech for the data, but the individual doesn't receive anything tangible in terms of money in exchange for their data. Consent for information is primarily given through cookies, and it's not at all clear when you give permission, how exactly is this information going to be shared. For brands, it's not possible to directly engage with end consumers as they rely on anonymized advertising and surveys. Most brands engage through analyzing historical segment level data, which makes individualized predictive personalization pretty much impossible. And last but not least, customer information needs to move across between both digital and offline commerce seamlessly, and that wasn't possible back in the day. So these things, these 5 questions kind of drove the purpose. Next slide, please. The purpose that would go on to drive CXsphere, and that would be to build a platform that would, 1, create a direct connection between brands and customers, 2, create complete transparency, equity, and trust in the way customer data are used by brands, and offer benefits to customers in exchange for sharing their data. This idea had legs because back then Google had just announced that its Chrome browser would stop supporting third-party cookies. Now, as it turns out, that date has been moved several times, and the most recent announcement was that it would be somewhere around mid-2024 that third-party cookies would no longer be supported by Google. And so CXsphere launched the year after this conversation in 2019. Next slide. And CXsphere has essentially built a platform that serves a two-sided market. On the brand side, CXsphere can combine real streams of customer data held by the brand with real-time zero-party data gathered by CXsphere. Zero-party data being data that the customer volitionally hands over to another entity. Secondly, provide AI-driven predictive and contextual business insights in exchange for payment from the brand, and end up providing a direct connection between the brand and customers. On the customer side, the individual customers provide permission to CXsphere to pull their real-time private digital data streams. Okay, for example, from Facebook, from Google, from Amazon, etc. CXsphere augments this data with publicly available digital footprint of the customer. So for example, product reviews they might have written, or public comments, or so on and so forth. And then CXsphere's brand owning clients can gain access on a case-by-case basis with specific incentives to customers who have given their permission. So there's complete transparency to the customer as to what exactly they're sharing, to whom, and what are they receiving in exchange for it. Next slide, please. So today, 4 years after its launch in 2019, it's gone through a very turbulent part of the recent history, weathered the COVID storm, and today it's landed a multi-year deal worth $12 million US. It's looking at global opportunities worth an additional US $13 million in annual recurring revenues. The pipeline is growing at 50% month on month, and it has clients and partners from Asia to Africa, Europe, and onwards to North America, so spanning the globe. A little bit about Sudipto. So Sudipto Sarkar is the co-founder and CEO of CXsphere. He's an engineer by training. Along the way, he did an MBA, and in 2013, he did the Ellipse program and is an alumnus of ours. That's where I met Sudipto some 11 years ago now. And it's a great pleasure and honor indeed to have Sudipto here today. Prior to co-founding CXsphere, he spent a couple of decades in the technology industry, leading data and commerce solutions globally. And this was both at large multinational corporations and high-growth startups. So Sudipto, if I could request you to please turn on, and your microphone. So thank you for making the time. I mean, I know how busy life at a startup is, and it's growing fast, so you must be incredibly busy. So thank you so much for taking the time to come to this event today. And the first question, sort of, how did you do it? I mean, it's been incredibly difficult times between the founding of CXsphere and today with COVID and everything. And what's been your strategy that led you to where you are today in 4 short years?
We looked at, first of all, yes, it has been an incredible journey. And thanks for bringing that up. We looked at which were happening in the market, especially the MarTech space. There were large number of MarTech players. So we looked at how do we differentiate, we being a product company, how do we look at product development as a competitive edge? So we used a combination of AI, which was a new technology at this moment to give us the edge. We used a combination of certain things being used on the open source and also proprietary models being created wherever there was a scope for differentiation. The other thing which we did was, we being a cloud solution, went global from day one. It was easy for us to go global being a cloud solution with little uh, actual physical assets on the ground, and focus on a couple of industries to start with before moving more across industries. I think that helped us make an edge while still allowing us to distribute our solution much more wider than what is typically possible of an organization of our size.
So, so you made the point that there are a very large number of MarTech players and it's very fragmented. So, specifically, what differentiates CXsphere from everybody else? I mean, AI is a piece of it, but can you elaborate a little more on this?
When there, I mean, the way we looked at it is, since there was a large number of MarTech players, most were trying to solve a piece of the puzzle. So we were very clear from day one that we will have an integrated end-to-end platform, which right from collecting customer information to understanding customer affinity to doing the customer touch point, all will be done. When we did that, that integrated solution solved the problem for the marketeers, where they no longer had to go through the painful process of stitching together multiple softwares to create their journey. The other piece which we were very different from other market players, where we ensured that we can provide the brands more data and more customer connect than what is feasible with others. We brought in incentivization to all the parties in the mix from day one. So there were more sharing and direct connection between the brands, the individuals, and even some of the partners who were in that space. This with an additional layer of very cutting edge AI models helped basically differentiate us from the day one.
Okay. Judita, I see there's a quick question, clarification question, which says, could you explain what you mean by cloud cloud solutions and what exactly does CXsphere do?
Sure. Typically, software solutions are either hosted on the premise within the customer's data centers, or it can be hosted on the cloud, which is a more of a technology term, but which is hosted remotely on places like AWS or Google Cloud and so forth. So we hosted it remotely. That allowed us to deploy it very quickly into multiple customers all across the globe, while without us having to go in physically into those customers' premises. Coming back to the question of what CXsphere does, CXsphere is a platform which connects brands directly to individuals with affinity. While we do this, we ensure that individuals who are part of so it's a two-sided platform. One side, you will have individuals who are sharing their information with the brands and connecting directly with them through consent and incentivization in place. On the other side, the brands are directly connecting to those individuals at a much more specific way or at a much more one-on-one way with full consent from those individuals.
Can you give a tangible example? Because maybe sort of bring it to a very concrete level rather than the abstract.
Sure. So we have I'll give two quick examples. So we have a brand which is a hospital brand trying to understand customers who would like to be part of the hospital set of customers and reside within a certain geography. Very specific segmented customers, and also want to understand what do they like uh, about this place or not. There are digital footprints and digital reviews of customers who about that which can be used over and beyond the survey and connect directly to those individuals. Now the individuals who are sharing this data get incentivized for sharing the data. They're not taking part in a survey, but they're sharing real-time digital perception about that brand. So that's one way of connecting and understanding customers. The other way is we are starting to work with an major travel service provider who is doing better connection with their end customers and understand what would bring those customers back into the fold. This has significant impact on their business strategy, and we are able to do that connection through multiple omni-channel touchpoints.
Okay. So can you, so you've explained your broad strategy and kind of some examples of the customers. Can you uh, elaborate a little bit on how are you creating value for each of the players? So on one side, you have the brands. On the other side, you have the end customers. And then, of course, you have the partners that you work with around the world and yourselves. So uh, how does value get created for everybody?
So I'll start with brands. Brands are trying to understand their customers more. They have a limited set of information about their customers. We
Mhm.
bring in additional sources of data and insight to the brands. That's the first thing we do. We then use uh, certain latest developments in artificial intelligence to augment that behavior and bring in more personalized insights, which can be then used to connect one-on-one to these customers. So we actually bring in a lot more level of insights for the brands than what is available with them. That's the most significant area of value we create. And then obviously we also do the omni-channel connections as well. For individuals who were earlier having their data shared, we bring value to them by giving them direct monetization benefits and giving them more control on their data which is being used. For partners, we are having a whole bunch of people with older tech stack in the MarTech space who are coming in and using certain parts of our solution. For example, a lot of the older CRM players are coming to us for getting AI-driven insights and augmentation of their customer profiles using our platform. So yes, we are adding value, combination of additional sources of data, a significant amount of AI-driven insights, and incentivization to the individuals.
Okay. So how how important is the AI piece around in this business?
Extremely important. We have consciously positioned and built our solution around the artificial intelligence.
Mhm.
The reason being, we realized that this is the technology which is changing the face of marketing. That's one. And we realized that early on. The other thing is, this is a technology which gave us a significant amount of competitive edge. We really built proprietary AI models around text-based and language-based elements of AI, which gave us behavioral context and intent understanding. The other element why we have been able to effectively use AI is the AI has now been integrated with every part of the solution, irrespective of what component is being used.
So you offer a very complete um, platform, if you will, providing end-to-end solution. Yet, you know, you've not really raised much money at all. So how did you manage to kind of do this on a shoestring, shall we say?
I think a lot of credit goes to the team. I was lucky to get an extremely committed team. As a startup, there cannot be a bigger blessing than that. The other element was we looked at really low cost ways of development, things which were non-differentiating were built on leveraging open source, while things which were differentiating was where we focused our proprietary technology and built it ourselves. Combination of these two actually helped us s- build this solution quite fast and at a shoestring budget.
Okay. Uh,
And additionally, as we were building this, we were constantly speaking with customers. So that's the other point. So refinement was happening very quickly.
so when you say you were speaking with customers, can you elaborate? Like, did you have a particular process? So who was engaged? What was going on?
So we had incremental pieces of solution coming out, and we were speaking to customers in an effort to see, obviously, if we could sell them, that's one. But more importantly, in the early stages, what their feedback was. Did they really see a differentiation? That's something which we were. Was it? Did they really see a differentiation? The second is, was it really solving any pain points, which was part of their current set of roadblocks which they see?
Now, we've been talking about customers in a very generic way. And obviously, the, you also mentioned right in the beginning, if I remember correctly, that you were one of the things you did was you were selective in the type of customers you focused on. So, um, who were these customers that you were focusing on, and why did you focus on those customers? And um, elaborate a little bit more on that.
Sure. We started with the retail organization. Retail as an industry domain spends a lot of money on marketing technology, and were one of the first fews were would also be open to using AI. This is a survey which we did. The other thing and then COVID stuck. We very clearly realized that we cannot go after businesses with physical presence because their own budgets were stuck. So we shifted our focus to media, which was a non-physical business. And our first few customers were from the media business. In fact, media business grew during COVID because people were spending more times in front of the screen rather than in physical premises. And that's how we picked and chose our customer segments in the early stages.
Okay. So now you've got the brands on one side, you've got customers on the other side. And the customer gives you permission to access their data, and you then pay them for that access. And on the brand side, then you've mentioned that you create a direct connection. So what does that mean? So is it that I now, let's say, brand X, am able to have conversations, sell stuff directly? What exactly is going on over there?
So the first thing when you do with direct connection is you are using the direct channels of engagement. So email, SMS, messaging, social DMs are some of the direct channels of engagement. That's one. But to do that, you need to understand customers' affinity and willingness to be connected. So that is something which we had in the back, where we were getting permission and also using AI to understand what would this specific customer like or dislike in terms of mode of communication, offers, the relevant timing, all of that in a more predictive fashion than in a reactive fashion. And the moment you go direct with customers, your cost of engagement goes down. Because the channels are relatively lower cost, you are more precise in terms of the offer, very personalized one-on-one kind of an offer. So your cost of engagement as a percentage of revenue goes down, and that's what we had focused on as a mode for direct engagement.
So in some sense, CXsphere is the glue between the customer and the brand.
Yeah, absolutely.
Uh, so what have been sort of the key challenges that you've had as you've built this business?
I think as obviously when we got our first version of the product in early 2020, COVID had just started. So that is something unprecedented, and we had to really figure out how to navigate through that when clients' budgets were cut, businesses were completely re-looking at the way they themselves did things. This was an unique challenge, I would say, which we had to navigate. The other thing which I believe most, I would say, bootstrapped startups go through is how do we find out the right distribution approach in a shoestring budget. This is typically, if you can figure the distribution model out, that changes the game totally. Most startup founders are strong on the product because they are the ones who are conceptualizing the product, and struggle on the distribution element. It took us a while to figure that out, and I believe we are now on a path where this model is working.
Okay. So I went to this point earlier saying that, well, how did you manage to build this organization on a shoestring budget? But what kind of sources of funding have you tapped along the way? I mean, can you elaborate a little bit on that?
So we initially built it with angel investment, some amount of our own funds. I think that's the starting point for all of us.
Mhm.
We're trying to start something. There are a few other sources of funds which can be looked at. Grants, especially if you're building something innovative, innovation grants are a strong source of fund which can fund a lot of your development cost. The other source of fund is invoice factoring. As you come into the revenue, you start looking at invoice factoring as a methodology for getting non-dilutive capital. We also took some, we were fortunate enough to get some amount of seed funding from one of the venture capital funds. And we also got debt capital from one of the entrepreneurship focused banks in Canada.
Okay, so mixture of
Mixture of few
debt grants
channels.
and equity. Um, okay, so you know, how do you as a entrepreneur, if you will, keep the faith and stick it out even when things are not looking good?
Thanks for that question. Yes, it is tough, and uh, what entrepreneurship has taught me is it's a great test for your own personal belief and mental resilience. Uh, an organization which is early stage bootstrapped primarily will obviously come to stages where you will think of how to manage the cash flow, and that is the point of time when you will have to rely on your belief and your uh, innovative ways of looking at funding as a mechanism to pass that stage. The other thing which helps is if you have a team or have a partner who has seen this before. I think that helps a lot, where you can talk through some of these elements of entrepreneurship. We also were very lucky to get a very well-rounded advisor network who gave us perspectives and uh, benchmarks of how others were doing similar things, which allowed us to sort of see this through from an end-to-end perspective. And the other element is you'll have to trust your judgment. For example, we soon realized at some point that we had built a system complex enough for us to go after the larger enterprises. We changed our strategy to go after the bigger ones, and the moment we flipped that over, things started shifting for us. So things started happening for us. Uh, we started getting bigger value customers. We were getting much more larger ticket size of opportunities, etc. So you'll have to believe in yourself. You'll have to constantly keep an eye on what's happening in the market vis-a-vis your solution, and take decisions accordingly.
So one element that was implicit in what you said was that you started with small put target customers, and then at some point you switched, and you felt that really changed things in your business. With 2020 hindsight, is this something, should you have started directly with the big customers, or do you still think that it was a good idea to kind of start with the small ones and then move to the big ones?
I still think starting with smaller customers helped us, because it took us a time to build a system complex and end-to-end integrated enough for large customers. Uh, we the decision to switch over to larger customers was a very conscious decision when we looked and compared our tech stack against other competitors. We also were soon realizing that smaller customers, we have now reached a stage where smaller customers, if we go via the smaller customer channel, one is we'll have to stick to a certain go-to market, which would take us both longer to come to a certain financial level. The other element is smaller customers cannot pay for that full complexity, and it was overwhelming them. So it is a conscious decision, but we could not do it from day one.
Okay. So this is sort of a question that, I've always, as a marketing professor, always comes to me, is that, you mentioned that, on the one hand, you were looking at competitors, on the other hand, you were looking at what customers wanted. Do you have any perspective on how do you balance those two? Where should you begin with one and then move to the other? How do you balance these two elements that really are important?
Look at your customers every day. If you will, look at your competitors only once in 6 months. Not more than that, because if you look at your competitors too long and too hard, you will end up becoming a copy of them and will probably just be a follower, which will make things difficult. Yes, you need to look at competitive positioning, but focus your energy on listening to the customers. That's what I would suggest.
Well, thank you, Sudipto. So I see there's a bunch of questions. So let me kind of begin with the longest one. Just to elaborate more on the role of AI here. What was the role of open source in helping set up your tech stack? How did you go about choosing which frameworks to use for the MVP, and then later for the platform itself, for the front end, back end, as well as for all the stream data processing, assuming that you must be using something like Kafka or Redshift for the customer and third-party data? So that's a long mouthful of a question.
Sure. And I presume it's someone with a little bit tech background.
So it comes from Ahan Nachane. I hope I pronounced your name correctly.
So an important question. I think the first I would answer is slightly more business focused. AI is the tip of the sword, which we use to enter and get a competitive edge. We used a combination of language models. We used even some of the latest developments in generative AI to understand customer affinity, to understand customer perception, and also quantify these behaviors. So we have quantifications around customers by stage, customers life stage. All of it is driven by AI-based prediction. Now, the second element, which is, yes, we used a framework called Lambda framework, slightly more technical. We used things at multiple layers, right from using things like Cassandra to Elasticsearch, multiple other technologies along the way. But yes, we used a standard framework to build this thing.
Okay, thank you. So this question here that's kind of interesting, and a comment, and let me maybe combine the two. So let me begin with the comment. There's a comment which says, partially this sounds like spyware. And then there's a comment which says, What is the guarantee of safety once the customer grants their permission? What about your European clients?
So the first thing is we take explicit permission, explicit usage. The customer is aware of how they are being perceived, what information is being shared, how long, and gets to do that willingly with consent. That's the first piece. Now, which keeps us clear of any regulatory elements, which is exactly what they want. Now, it is extremely transparent because the customer sees both what data has been collected, what has been shared, and even what has been augmented for them, and then gives a permission. Now, from a safeguard of information, there are standard design techniques which are being used, encryption being one of them. Even us will not be able to access the information, especially the personally identifiable information. It is kept separate from uh, the non-identifiable information, the AI, and there are encryption layers in every place. So yeah, so yes, it's technologically complex, but the safeguards are in place because without that we would not be allowed to do business.
Okay. So if I got you right, then the customer gives explicit permission after looking at all the data that you have on them, the ones that they freely gave you access to, the ones that you've gone and scraped from the web. Then I look at my data, and then you come and say that company XYZ wants to look at your data, and they're willing to offer €2, 20 cents, whatever it is, and you either say yay or nay, and that's when the customer data is shared with a particular client.
Yeah. On the contrary, I just want to add one more point. On the contrary, the customer is now much more aware of what is out there on him, and how is being perceived by the technology world, and has more control on it rather than us misusing that information.
Right. That's an interesting point you make, because I haven't got a clue what's out there about me. So it's
And
going to
you'd
be
be
interesting
surprised
to.
if you with that.
I'm sure I will be. So there's a question. There's a question on blockchain, which kind of, from privacy, it's kind of a nice segue to blockchain, which is, do you employ blockchain technology in your business proposition? And can you give an example how this works if used at all?
Uh, we do not use blockchain as of now, but it's a very relevant question because we did think of putting especially the identity information into a chain at a later point of time. The problem with blockchain technology and using AI on top of it is the blockchain technology is just maturing enough to be used for AI with certain amount of performance in place. So we are keeping a close watch on what is possible over there, but we have not used so far in our systems. But yes, blockchain has multiple use cases in terms of storing the information in a wallet to sharing it with the traceability and so forth.
Okay. So a more sort of from technical to a more strategic question, how do you acquire, what's your acquisition strategy for customers?
So we realized that outbound is and by outbound, let me explain outbound a bit more. So we use a combination of email and LinkedIn based outbound to acquire customers. This has not only allowed us to acquire brands, but also got us in contact with some fabulous partners in the overall journey. So I would suggest somebody starting with a startup kind of a mechanism with a lesser budget, try outbound. It should help you gain your early access plus test the markets at a lesser cost. And that's what we did. And we are just looking at what point we would start using other mechanisms of customer acquisition, for example, uh, inbound driven by content or search engine optimizations and so forth.
So a related question goes back to your early days of customer acquisition and says,
Mhm.
what was your go-to-market strategy to get end customers? Because today only a small majority focus on incentives and are not eager to switch to new sources to look for brands.
So there are a couple of things which happens. Our early stage large brands would also allow is to, so we built a combination of having brands allowing us to reach out to their customers. That's the first piece, because they wanted more information out of them. Uh, the second element is we built technologies which allows one customer to bring in another customers, both from a technology point of view, for example, referrals. The other is the incentives provided into the for the individuals, uh, sort of bring them in. Yes, it might vary slightly from market to market and customer segment to segment. We understand that as we move from uh, certain markets, the focus might move from incentivizing customers to making them more, giving them more control on their privacy. So some of those weightages in terms of what brings an individual to the platform will be put to test. We will keep a close watch on it.
Okay. Uh, And so I think there's one more question here that's quite interesting. It is, goes back to the challenges question that I asked you earlier in our discussion. So, what was the most challenging from you when you got the idea to start your own business? Uh, and can you tell how many times you pivoted from your original ideas, if at all? Can you give examples? Who were your mentors, advisors, etc., etc.? This sounds like a comprehensive exam question. I like it. This is from an anonymous attendee.
Sure. I think the most challenging when you start your own business is the fear of failure, right? You are coming out of a corporate role where your bills are taken care of. You have been at that role for some time and achieved some level of financial security, and more which comes with the corporate roles. So the first thing is to mentally let go of that. That's the first challenge. The second challenge is then comes a series of more execution challenge in terms of how do you find the first few people and convince them to join you when you hardly have any money. uh, Identify them and ensure that you are aligned and they are aligned to the broad objective of the business. Uh, now, once this is over, there are a series of few steps: getting your first product out, getting your first payable customer in, or for that matter, getting somebody to even use that system in their premises and try their business data or their business process on it. These are few of the talking of pivots. We did quite a few. Means in fact we were some will look like pivots, some will not look like. So you will constantly decide between what would go first, while your broad direction might still remain the same, but you will decide on what would come in first versus what. We soon realized that we would first go after the brands while we build the end customer or the end individual system. Our first revenues would come from the brands, and it is important to build the demand side of the information, which is the brands, early on. So that's one pivot which we took very consciously. We built certain systems which we realized were too early, let go of them after a couple of trials. Uh, so I would say we are pivoting at least initial stages every 3 to 6 months. We were doing small pivots. We were fortunate enough not to do any major pivot. One of the pivots I can say from a concept, we were actually looking at blockchain because somebody asked that question. We were actually looking at blockchain as a system architecture. We had even presented that in one of the government challenges and were said that the solution looks great, but then decided against it as we move forward, looking at the constraints of the technology vis-a-vis our own uh, roadmap. We did get advisors right from renowned academics to people who have been in the industry for long, managing directors of large insights companies. There are many other people who were kind enough to bring in their perspective while not still being a formal advisors. We had serial entrepreneurs who came in and talked to us, helped shape our guidance in terms of the roadmap and how do we do the go-to-market and so forth. So you will, as an entrepreneur, you will always look at both formal advisors and informal advisors and pick and choose the advice which fits your journey at that point of time. But the advisors definitely bring you a very well-rounded perspective.
Okay. So there's a question here about your AI again. Did you encounter some difficulties developing your AI solution? What lessons did you learn from it? And is there something you'd like to improve around your AI solution?
So we built certain language-based models, which we were calling contextual AI, and uh, some of the libraries which were used to reference those models were actually built in-house and proprietary. It took us a while to figure that out, how to build that, and it was definitely challenging. The other challenge which typically comes with AI models is not the model in itself. How do you handle data and the quality of data coming from different sources? Uh, that's the second piece. And the third piece is how do you really productionize this? The models are fine, but running them on real-time systems, giving both choosing which ones to give an output on a real-time basis versus a batch output basis is something which requires quite a bit of understanding and due diligence.
So related to this question, there's a question around, it's AI being a very rapidly evolving space. And so,
Mhm.
um, how have you been keeping up with it? And if you're seeking to enter the US market, uh, that differentiation will be quite critical. And so what are your thoughts on that?
We have built certain models which is very, very differentiated. Yeah, even for most of the advanced economies, we have built certain models which drives affinity on generative AI. Just to throw out some reference terminologies. Uh, we would obviously understand it better as we go deeper into the US market. But the first impression when we have launched this is extremely differentiated even for the most advanced economies. I would, for the sort of because we are speaking on a public space, we would not go further into how we built it and so forth. But yes, we believe that that differentiation would hold good in a completely global market.
So I think we have time for one more question, Shadipto, and there's a question on, you're now present in multiple geographies. How did you go about the geographical expansion, and was it driven largely by the brands, or was a geographical prioritization done on the basis of ease of entry in the different markets? So essentially, how did you decide which markets to go into?
So the first thing is we chose the domains, the industries. Then we looked at in which markets these industries were going through transformations. In some of these cases, the industries were pan geography. So we literally went after the industry, and whichever market responded first did that. Now, certain countries by their nature are transforming more, and they are the markets which picked up the solution faster. Obviously, as a startup, the strategy was whichever market responded better, you double down on that, either geography or domain. And that is the strategy we took before moving to the next market. If you recollect, I had mentioned outbound as a strategy. Now, outbound actually allowed us to test some of these geography entry points much cheaper, and also allowed us to switch strategies in terms of a geography entry at a much more nimbler way. Yeah, and we obviously looked at things like GDP growth and industry shifts happening in each of these markets.
So I think the important thing you were saying there, Sudipta, was that, you have a strategy, you identify some spaces, but then you experiment, and you experiment at the least cost possible so that you can learn from that experiment and then double down on what it is you're going to do.
Absolutely.
So, Sudipto, thank you very much for sharing the hour. We're at 4:59 p.m. Central European Time. So we're at the end. So I'd just like to take the last minute to say thank you very much for sharing your knowledge from this experience. Thank you very much, and all the best in taking CXsphere to the next level. Okay.
Thank you, Amitabh, for having me, and thanks everyone who were part of the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.